So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another iPace Driver Show with myself, Gary Whitaker, and iPace owner, and
myself, Abu Dhabi Dude.
and you can see we've got another great guest with us tonight, Maz, also known as @EpicWheeling on Twitter, which I love that. That's such a great Twitter handle. And for the people who don't know Maz, Maz is the person behind a lot of the statistics you see quoted on Twitter. It seems to be that, and also has been keeping track of all the GridServe installs and what I've been doing with Ecotricity over the last week, and kept me informed when I knew my local one had been changed. So I was able to rush down and have a look at it and check it all out.
Oh, that's good.
That's good stuff. So, why did you start all the stuff on EVs? What's your interest
in EVs? Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's like the EV origin story. So yeah, I mean, I actually only passed my driving test about 3 years ago. So at that time, I kind of was like, it'd be great if I could get in a hybrid car and drive something that's a bit more sustainable. And then I looked on like Auto Trader, and these things were quite expensive. You know, they were like 10K plus.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I was like, oh, let's, for a joke, let's check out electric cars. And then I saw the Zoe, and it was like coming up to be like 5K, and then you had the Leaf. I was like, whoa, why is that? And then I discovered, there's a battery lease. But I was just really, I got pulled in then because I knew about the Leaf, but I didn't know about anything else. And that's kind of, as I started chipping away, I got more and more fascinated, learning about, kilowatts, kilowatt hour, charging, where people charge, how much range, and all of this stuff. And really, since then, I've been kind of really engrossed and obsessed almost with EVs. And it's funny because I remember, I think November 2018, something like that. That's when I first started looking at the statistics. And I think I remember seeing like there were 1,000 electric cars sold in that month. And I was like, oh, that's pretty good. I was like, a new record. And now it's down to like 19,000. And it's just reminded me how much has changed in less than 3 years, really. So now, now I drive an EV as well, which is amazing.
What did you end up with?
So I drove the Ioniq for a while, the new one, which was really, really good. We're hoping to get an ID3, but in the interim, we've got a Corsa electric. And yeah, and since I've gotten an EV, I've had 4 other people in my family who've also made the switch. So
nice.
It really does pull you in like that, I guess.
It does. I was discussing this at work today. We have a sort of virtual coffee break or whatever, and we were 2 of us were both EV owners, and basically it was the case of but once you've gone onto an EV, never going back. You can't make that switch back. It just doesn't work. You just miss so much.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife has still got a petrol car at the moment, and I spent ages trying to convince her, and she finally got to an extended drive. I mean, she'd been in the iPace obviously loads, but she got a sort of a good chance to drive an EV on her own, and now she's just sold on it because it was like, I didn't realize the regenerative braking and
all this good stuff. Lack of gears. That's
the lack of gears.
One of the guys on the call today did say manual gearboxes.
So I think in a lot of cases, all it needs, like you say, is for people to actually experience it themselves, and suddenly all of those nagging doubts that have been sort of buzzing away at their ear for years, they kind of go away once you've actually had the experience, don't they?
Yeah, and it becomes addictive, that kind of driving something so smooth. Yeah.
So moving on to your love affair with the electric highway, how did that all come about? I mean, for people Gary mentioned it, but just to highlight what you started doing was on your Twitter feed.
Yeah.
You tracked all the electric highway charges that were being upgraded as part of the new GridServe takeover of the electric highway. Something which strangely GridServe themselves weren't really doing.
Yeah.
But you took it on board. What was the driving force, if you pardon the pun, behind that?
No, it's a good question. I mean, I think I saw the first upgrade go live. I think it was Cher Valley Services. That was back in like April or something. It was quite a long gap between the next one. And when that first one went up, I was kind of curious, like, you know, what's going to be next? Where is it going to be? And I kind of was wondering this for a while. And I think it came from like frustration of a lack of information. So I started looking around, and then there wasn't really much information at that time because I think they hadn't actually started the upgrade, like properly ramped it up. And then the next location came about, and then I kind of slowly noticed, oh, there's another one, and then another one, and that's when I started looking at, I was looking at Twitter feeds, so I was like searching GridServe, looking at people who were tweeting about it, and there were a few people who were like, oh, there's some works happening here, like construction works, so I can't access these chargers. And then I kind of noticed and made the link that within a few days, as soon as chargers have been removed, that means they're going to be replaced like within a few days. So then I started looking for like complaints on ZapMap of chargers being removed. And it kind of, I built it initially just for myself. So I was like, I need somewhere to kind of keep track of this information I'm keeping in my head. And then I thought I'd put it on Google Maps, and because I did do something similar a while back when I discovered the Braintree forecourt. So what I found out was when I was looking at GridServe as a company on Companies House, they had registered a lot of companies, and each company had the name of the new forecourt location. Right. So like, there was York, there was Cheltenham, all of these things. And I was like, oh, I'll map all of this out just to see what it looks like. And I think I also did one once on, because someone mentioned to me that BP Pulse are allowed to install chargers at locations where there is an M&S Wild Bean coffee shop. Yep. So then I looked, it's almost a bit too much time on my hands, but I looked up and found all the service stations which had this facility and put that on a map as well. And I think it's just me trying to make sense of all this information. So I started doing it with the map, and I tweeted it, and I quickly kind of realized like a lot of people appreciated this. And I think the reasons probably were because, one, it's good to know when the chargers aren't working and they've been removed. You kind of need to plan for that, especially with the fact that they don't include AC charging anymore. And then two, people were just really excited about this idea of a new proper charging network on motorways. And it just kind of blew up from there. Now there's like 75,000 views and and then I had lots of people at GridServe saying, oh, this is really good. So I think that fed me putting more time into it. And I spend quite a bit of time looking at all the different sources of data that I have and trying to make sure I can provide an accurate picture of how things are going.
Well, it's a brilliant resource, and I mean, I've referred to it loads, and it's amazing how much detail you've managed to get in there, just from, as you say, trawling through other feeds rather than, it's not something where you're just taking the data off GridServe's website or whatever. It's coming from so many different locations and sources.
It's been so accurate as well. That's the thing. You've obviously hit the right track of it.
So I mean, how difficult is it to get the information? I know, as you say, it's coming from other people's feeds and data. I mean, are you using things like ZapMap's data? Things like that as well?
So I use ZapMap, I use PlugShare. Like I said, I use Twitter, I use SpeakEV, and I also use GridServe's website. So some of it is kind of manual, me looking through. Some of it is more automated. And I have, yeah, I would. It would be really helpful, I think, if some of the third-party apps opened up some, because I know they have APIs, but they're under certain restrictions and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think there are some changes that could be made to make my job easier. But you know, I'm kind of like a niche use case, I guess. So, but yeah, it's from all those different sources. So I'm some of them I'm like manually checking at different points in the day if anyone's posted a comment. Other times I'm running like a script. So yeah.
I mean, I guess, did it get to a point where once enough people knew what you were doing, they were contacting you as well? Did you get to that?
Yeah. So I did get very kindly. A lot of people at GridServe started to notice. I had a lot of people, because I posted it on LinkedIn once, and I guess what happened was someone at GridServe liked it, and then another person did, and then I just had a lot of people commenting saying, you know, this is really good. Thank you so much. And I think what they appreciated was the fact that, you know, they've got their heads down trying as quickly as possible to replace all these chargers, integrate all these different, like the back office system, and coordinate with the motorway service operators, the DNOs, all of that stuff. And as much as they would like to, like, provide as much information and as quickly as possible, they haven't been able to. And I think that what I've done is kind of allowed like people to get excited about the upgrade and rebuild that reputation of the network. So GridServe have noticed that, and I was kindly invited to go to the press event and meet Toddington Harper. And that was really, you know, that was really lovely. They treated me really well. And it's almost a bit like, you know, I kind of did this for my own selfish reasons, but and I'm just still blown away by not only their comments, but also on Twitter. I still get like messages every other day where people are like, you know, this is really useful. Thank you for doing this. And yeah, so that's great.
Well, it is a brilliant, you know, I mean, it is hugely useful for almost anybody that's making road trips at the moment, because most people, not everybody I know, but most people by now have got to the point where they plan their trips. Oh, excuse me. They plan their trips avoiding using the electricity chargers. So you providing that service has given them a means of avoiding the old ones, but being able to make use of the new ones rather than going 2-3 miles off the motorway. And that in itself is hugely beneficial, I would imagine, for quite a lot of people.
Oh, I'm glad. No, that's really good. It makes it all worth it, really. So, yeah. So, like for now, so in terms of an update on how they're doing so far, I think they've done about 44% of the network, and there's about eight weeks to go until the end of September, which was the kind of target. So they're doing pretty well, you know. I think the EV industry as a whole, we've been used to kind of some empty promises and like lack of communication and all that. So I think it's creating a lot of optimism, right?
Indeed, yeah. It's nice to see, as you say, it's nice to see somebody actually following up on a promise, particularly with a public charging network, Tesla aside.
As GridServe would say, #delivered.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it's quite important to me because I don't know. I mean, I mentioned it on Twitter a few times, but I don't have a charger at home, so that's kind of this public network is kind of what I rely on. So I'm interested in it in general, and that's probably what led to me kind of keeping track of it as well, because I like to hear about like what new solutions are coming out that can make my life easier as well. So
yeah. So you've currently got the Ioniq, sorry, was that?
No, so I did have the Ioniq, but now I have the Corsa Electric.
Oh, you've got the Corsa at the moment, waiting for, yeah. Okay. What's the charging speed on the Corsa?
It's 100 kilowatts.
All right, so you can make use of the full
Yeah, it makes a lot of difference. You know, the Ionic, I think I'd say it had more range, but slower charging. And I'm more than happy to stop. Well, I tend to want to stop for like 5-10 minutes anyway. I'm sure you kind of have noticed this as well with the iPace. But one thing I have noticed, because I drove the ID3 for a while, and I've mentioned this before as well, is that not all charging profiles are equal, right? So,
Absolutely.
this is the peak rate that they advertise, but like like ID3 also does 100 kilowatt charging, but the curve is a lot more gradual. Whereas this, I have to time it so that I'm reaching there at the right state of charge to get to
I actually think that's something we perhaps should be enforced at some point, that the cars have to publish their charging graph, because that's such an important thing these days. It's almost as important as miles per hour and capacity.
To be honest, yeah, because like you say, Gary, you see all these adverts saying 150 kilowatt charging, 200 kilowatt charging, whatever. But you know, if it only does that for a minute or two, then it's not really 150 kilowatt charging, you know.
Yeah. I mean, there was talk about that you were going to have to publish your average charge rate over 60% was what they were talking. So this commonly quoted 20%.
20 to 80,
charge was actually going to become mandatory at one stage. I don't know if that's progressed, but it's certainly an interesting. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you start looking at some of the more modern architecture charge. I mean, the Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6, the charge graphs on those are just for an iPace owner, they're just amazing. They go straight.
And I've noticed some of them, they do, like I heard like the ID4, for example, does 38 kilowatts at 90% or something like that. And that's almost like, you know, we're used to 50 kilowatt chargers, and getting that at like 90% state of charges. It's nice, but it's also like makes me worry that some people will hog wrap their chargers a bit more.
But I think that's the case with the iPace, because obviously the iPace is top to bottom, so you're not actually going to 100% ever. So you do want to stay on to 90%, because you're going to get charged reasonably. And I think that's the same with the ID4. They've topped and bottomed it, so they get that charge rate. I mean, it is the charge curve. If you see the ID4 charge curve, it's definitely better than the iPace one. It holds on, but I mean, that's right. That's of course that's if you pay for the 120 kilowatt charging on the ID4. By default, you get a 50 kilowatt.
That's really frustrating as well. I don't know how you both feel about that, but I feel like you can't rely on the customers to, you know, when EVs are so kind of confusing and new already, you can't rely on customers to make that decision.
And they won't make the decision.
I feel that options on charging speed really shouldn't exist. It's just, in addition to making the whole car buying process more confusing for people making the switch, they won't understand any of that. But it's going to make the second-hand market utterly baffling in a few years' time.
Yeah, I mean, it was even difficult enough when I was looking on Auto Trader at Zoe's, like understanding which ones are leased, which ones are owned. You know, which ones are the quick charge, which ones are the when they have the 22 and the 43. So I think you're completely right, Alex. That's confusing. And if I remember correctly, with the ID4 or whatever, it's only a couple of £100. It's like, for the sake of that, you're kind of causing issues down the line. But I guess with all new technology, there's all these weird quirks.
It does seem odd to me that they made that an option. I mean, the other thing which I know you were discussing on Twitter a couple of weeks back, or a couple of days back, was the whole voltage and ampage side of things, which is again really confusing.
I mean, I only kind of learned this very recently, and for someone who's been like looking at EVs every day for 3 years, that's it's hard to find stuff like that. So the idea that, you know, on a 400 volt pack, if you go to one of these chargers, because the maximum ampage is 200, you're only going to get about 60 kilowatts or thereabouts, or 80. And whereas if you go with an 800 volt system, which there are only, I think, 2 cars that do that at the moment, then you'll get the actual advertised 120 kilowatts. And it's a bit more confusing. And I've seen this on ZapMap, because I see the comments quite a lot, that people often complain that they're not getting the 120 kilowatts speed that's on the display. And it's interesting that GridServe have chosen to show that as the speed, because 80% of people aren't going to get that, and that's going to make them say that the charger is faulty, which will lead to people not using that charger.
Yeah.
And I mean, how have you, like, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, I think I can't remember exactly when it was. It was more recent than you would think, though. The moment I realized that plugging a 100 kilowatt capable car into a 120 kilowatt charger didn't necessarily get you 100 kilowatt charging.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah,
what?
exactly, yeah. That's right. And
I mean, what about you, Gary? That must be, obviously you've been aware of it for a while as well, but it must blow your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly noticed. I think it was the Intervolts I first noticed it on and worked out that you weren't necessarily going to get that sort of charge rate out of them. And I think it's one of the huge sellers for the 800 volt systems which are coming out. I think a lot of companies are going to have to move to 800 volt fairly rapidly, because people come to expect this sort of rate charge. I mean, when you consider what you can put in a 95 or an EV6 or a Taycan or an Audi Quattro LS, you can, those things charge so quickly. And so consistently across the charge rate, right? But you do, if you're going to do that 800 volt, you have to do like here and I have done, and actually allow still 400 volt charging, because there's just so many 400 volt chargers out there. There's very few 800 volt chargers at the moment in the UK. There's a lot more in Europe, but in the UK, there's very few of them.
But it's funny though. I mean, I remember when the Ampage came out. I remember Tesla Bjorn doing loads of videos about it at the time, and him being really impressed that the Ampage had gone with the 400 volt architecture.
Yeah.
And here we are, three years later.
Yeah.
Talking about how, you know, we need to put that behind us now, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, talking to some people I know in the industry, the 800 volt seems to be where they think the top out is. They don't think you're going to get over 1,000 or anything like that. It just becomes too dangerous. So I think obviously temperature kills, not voltage, but still there's issues there. But obviously, I mean, 800 volt has lots of advantages for the charging industry, because they can have smaller cables. It's a lot easier to cool them. They don't have a lot. I mean, it's just so many things they can do. Even when it comes down to putting in lower voltage chargers and low. I'm surprised in some ways that some of the top out rates on some of these 800 volt systems, about sort of 230 on the Kia, something around there anyway. Seems quite low compared to what they potentially could get out of them. But
well, even Porsche reduced it, didn't they? Because originally they were talking about. Were they talking about 325 kilowatts? 300 kilowatts?
It was certainly over 300. Yeah. Yeah,
right at the start, and now then when they actually introduced the car, it was it 270, 275, something like that. So I don't know. I'm guessing it's maybe a battery degradation issue that they're fighting against, or I genuinely don't know. But it's interesting that those kind of figures have now dropped down a bit now that we're seeing them in the real world. I mean, you know, 275 kilowatts.
I have heard that part of it is to do with the CCS connector as well. So I know that a liquid cooled connector can do up to 500 amps or something like that.
Right.
And I don't know if that, people just haven't found a need for something more like the hardware manufacturers of these chargers, or it's something with the CCS standard, like fundamentally. Like I know that the V3 supercharger is something more like 680 amps or something like that. And funnily enough, it's a thinner cable than the other ones. So it's just a lot of I guess, variables. But
Yeah.
one thing I didn't know was that if you have an 800 volt system, and it doesn't have the capability to kind of use a 400 volt charger, does that mean you can't use a 400 volt charger, Gary?
No, I think it can use it, can't it, Gary?
You can use it, but it's very degraded. So I'm not totally sure on the technicals, but I do know that there is definite degradation involved. It doesn't work. You don't get what you'd expect to get by essence of imagination. So
that's probably why I don't see many Porsches on.
Yeah, I think they basically get roughly half speed. So you
yeah, which makes sense because it's trying to do 800 volts at the ampage and not being able to do it. But yeah, so it's really good that Kieran's handy to put that 400 volt and their charge curve on their 400 volt is really nice as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's just 50, isn't it?
So it's pretty amazing, and also the efficiencies are good. One thing I wanted to ask you about was you posted again the other day about this CMA investigation. Obviously, that's with the CRIDSERV coming on. The timing of that seems very interesting.
Yeah.
wait to the takeover and then to launch the investigation. I mean, I was quoted today in a Register article about this, and I think a lot of people being asked about it. I mean, my bottom line on this is I don't want them to come back and do what they've done with petrol stations on the services and say that it's okay to have competition between services, because nobody drives down the road to the next services just because it's got cheap petrol. You need competition on the services. So if they are going to do this, I don't want them saying to GridServe you've got to divest half your charges. I want them to say, oh no, you can have other charges actually on the same site. Unfortunately, I think it's probably going to go the other way because that's the way the CMA tends to work. Get rid of stuff. So I could see it saying, oh, you can only have it in half the motorway services or quarter of the motorway or two-thirds maybe, which would be very sad.
I just don't get the point of the argument, to be honest. I mean, I tweeted quite a lot about this when they announced it as well. For years, people have been writing to the Transport Secretary saying this is a monopoly, it shouldn't be allowed to happen, we're getting abysmal service, it's not working, you're putting off people from buying EVs because they're seeing these chargers not working and thinking, no, it's not for me, this should be fixed. Nothing was done. And then, like, within a couple of months of GridServe moving in and actually turning it into a service that everybody wants to use, they announced this monopoly. Now, I'm not in favor of monopolies at all, but the argument they've used just simply makes no sense to me. They're the cheapest provider out there, really. They're upgrading. We can't really comment on the reliability yet because we've got no record on that, but they're doing a massive upgrade and they are rolling it out really quickly. So they've obviously got the right intentions. And it just seems odd to me that after 5 years of people complaining and not able to use them, the inquiry gets launched now.
No, I know that it's a real shame. I think that that's happened because it's a big investment that GridServe have had to do. I'm guessing that the monopoly is or the exclusivity deal is partly why GridServe chose to buy the network. And invest all this money in taking those charges out and replacing them. And often that has meant some workaround solutions. And then for them to kind of be told, now we're going to start looking at getting other people in. Ultimately, this is good for the consumers, of course. It's, if they do try to prevent competition within services, like Gary said, then it could be a good thing for us. But it is, I would be very frustrated if I was GridServe. And frustrated if I was, I am one of those people that's been complaining for the last few years and nothing's happened. What I understand is that the consultation started kind of last year. So it could be just a coincidence, but it's still frustrating that it's taken this long. And it could end up being detrimental to a company that's put a lot of money in for the sake of EV owners. So, yeah.
Yes, I think I'm totally on what you're saying now. I think if I was good stuff, I'd be very disappointed with the timing of this. I think and I'm sure they did their due diligence before this to see if how the CMA investigation was going. So they probably had an inkling this might actually happen.
Yeah.
But I am concerned about it. I think the CMA's history is not good for actually putting real competition into place. Certainly not things like this. They've tended to say you can't have so many things in one town, or rather than actually sort of not looked at this fact that people are tied to a particular location. They can't go anywhere else, and therefore they have really no choice. Which is the thing, but maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe they will actually say you can, because I think Good Surf can point to the fact that they've got the cooperation with Tesla. So rugby, they've obviously got the Tesla service ones in there, and if Tesla are forced to open up, which what this, and they've already said they're going to open up, but I think they're probably getting preemptive strikes in there, because I know Norway are going to force their hand anyway. In Norway, that they're going to have to open up, and I suspect the UK will as well. Then Good Surf can say, well, we've got another provider in there anyway, so there's competition there anyway, so that's not an issue. Equally, you could argue that on the extra services they've got Ionity in there as well. So they may be able to push back on some of the services, but some ones where they're the only provider, that may be more of a challenge to do. And I certainly could see them being forced to divulge the rest of you. But fortunately, they have their own services that they're putting together, so they won't have that problem.
That's true as well. So they are trying to think about this.
Yeah. And they're making good progress as well, from what I can see. I mean, I saw some really good photographs of the Norwich site, which is coming together really well, very quickly. We'll be making a pilgrimage out there when that comes out. Which is an interesting site, because they're building that vertically. So unlike the Braintree one where they've got the stuff outside, they're actually building it with the services on top, and you park underneath, which gets around the canopy problem. I love that idea. Anybody who's watched me will know I'm a huge fan of canopies. I think actually having to charge in the rain is a ridiculous thing.
They're also hoping to put those out in the electric hubs as well. So like on the motorway services. I think Cornwall is the first one where they will be trialing having a canopy.
Well, the problem with canopies is our archaic planning regulations. It's very easy to put. It's incredibly easy to put a parking space in, and a parking space can have a charger on it very easily, because you can have fitments for the purposes of parking and engagement. There's some special phrasing of it, but basically it's meant to allow you to put meters in. Parking meters in, but you can use the same rule to basically get a charger in. But that limits you to what you can do. So it limits you to the parking space being the size of the traditional parking space from the 1950s, which is on the regulations. So all the cars, and of course all cars have got wider. And that's not our manufacturers going and saying, oh, we make all cars wider. It's because they've had to for safety equipment. So once you start putting all the side airbags in, the cars get wider to get the same passenger size. So we need wider spaces, but the planning permission hasn't changed in nearly 50 years, maybe 60 years actually, on those regulations. So there's a lot of challenges in terms of actually getting anything in other than a small box which goes up to a certain height. You can't go over a certain height, and all sorts of things like that. And putting canopies in would actually be a breach of that regulation. So that's unless they could figure a canopy which actually came out from the charger. which is a bit tricky to do, because you getting enough support in the charger for a cantilever thing is a bit on the challenging side. But so that's been the challenge. Obviously less of a challenge at services, because you don't necessarily need to. You'll get full plan. You go for a full planning permission at services anyway. You wouldn't just go use that exemption for parts. But so it's interesting to see how that works out. I think. But I'm a huge fan of canopies. I got soaked at rugby the first time I went there.
Really? I remember I watched your video of it when you went up there, because I think you were one of the first people, or at least one of the first YouTubers that did pay a visit. And that was it was. I found it really helpful video, seeing what it's actually like,
Yeah.
using it and stuff.
Yeah, that was a really funny day because I bumped into Jagman Ipace, who's one of the other Twitter followers and one of our followers on YouTube.
Yeah.
But I didn't actually know I bumped into him because it was raining so
Yeah,
hard.
you found
Actually
out
recognise each other, which is really funny. It's one of those days that we could stop and chat. But I have been back and it's been nice or whatever, and it's working. And also, I've obviously been to the one in Peterborough as well, which was really going to the video on that one as well, which it's actually my most watched video this year. So that was
Wow.
really interesting in electricity, or as was in electric highway as is.
Yeah. Shows how much pent up interest there is in it, doesn't it?
That is, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was a masterstroke of GridServe actually taking the electric highway name and touching it. So I think it's really good branding. GridServe is, I mean, we know what GridServe is, but it doesn't say to you it's anything to do with EVs or anything because it obviously was there then. But it does say it's something to do with electricity. You get the feeling it's an electricity grid or whatever, and so it gives them a bit of, oh, this is some provider for electricity who's now doing electric charging. Makes some sense to people.
Yeah.
No, I remember that being something that really stuck out to me when I was first learning about electric cars, was the electric highway. I was like, oh wow, that's a cool name. Until I realized that a lot of people didn't like it.
It's a cool
the chargers.
It's a great brand. It's a great concept as well. And I mean, I've often said this, that, and I've got no proof of this or ever why I think this, but I've thought that the whole reason director of GridServe is about renting cars out, and the fact that because they're backing Hitachi Capital, who are obviously car contracts and car leasing, and I think that having the electric highway and being able to offer that to the people they're leasing their cars out to gives them that competition to the Tesla approach. It has always been said that Tesla's main thing is they've got the supercharged network. How do you rent cars out? Your contract hire contracts to big companies, because that's what they're targeting, the big fleets. If you haven't got it, so if you can say to your big fleet, look, and you can charge everywhere on our electric highway as part of your deal, then that's a huge selling point, I think. And I think that's why they got the big investment they got for this. It's not. I mean, the guys at the electric highway GridServe guys are very keen EVers and very enthusiastic, as we know from talking to Sam. I mean, not very few people had a G Whiz. I mean, that's definitely EV fanatics almost. So they obviously know the stuff, but they wouldn't have got that investment if there hadn't been a initial surge. And I think that I mean, obviously now with everything changing, how to the way EVs are going, getting further investment is a lot easier, and they're starting to see that. But it's definitely an interesting area.
I mean, I see it every day here now. There's an extra EV on the road, you know. It's just every time you go out, you just see a few more, you know. Saw Skoda Enyaq the other day for the first time on
oh wow.
You know, and it's guy around the corner's just bought an ID4. Guy down the road there's got 2 i3s. You know, and it kind of feels like we've hit that point now, that much talked about tipping point.
Well, I mean, going back to that conversation I was having in my virtual coffee break today. Normally, every place I've worked, you go into these rooms and you start chatting to people, and maybe one person in the room's got an EV. Today, over half the people in the call had EVs.
Wow.
And that's definitely a real shift. That's something I wouldn't have expected even 6 months ago. And virtually everybody else in the room was thinking about getting one.
That's definitely one thing I've noticed in the last 3 years is just the kind of the interest and also the understanding around EVs and just the narrative around EVs. You know, in 2018 and 2019, I was kind of having lots of these conversations with friends and families, and I'd always kind of start from scratch, like working through all the different myths that they had heard about, and you know, getting them to a point of a better understanding of what EVs are actually like. And I feel like now, especially in the media, that the articles and what's published is more on the positive side. There's still a bit iffy, but that's one thing I've definitely noticed. And it's not necessarily that, you know, the tech has drastically improved. It has, not, but there's something fundamentally that's changed about owning an EV. It's just that more and more people realize that, one, the climate change is really important and we need to act fast. And two, that EVs are actually really good for the environment. They're better for the environment. They can fit into people's lifestyles, and people are buying them. Like the sales that just keep going up and up. And I think that's what I find most. I think the other thing as well is the fact that the government announced the ban, 2030 ban. I think I always felt like the technology was gonna push people there anyway, but having the government say that kind of validation or that backing is a catalyst for changing the narrative around EVs as well. And people just tend to look at them more positively now. And when I'm looking at these statistics, I'm kind of looking at, by the end of 2022, I think 1 in 3 cars, and I think this is very bullish, but 1 in 3 cars will be fully electric. So by the end of next year, I think that is a possibility. And then 2024, it could be 50%, based on just kind of the trajectory that we've had over the last few years.
I think for me, one of the big things as well is with the ban, what it's done is it's forced the car companies' hands. So where up till now, the car companies themselves have been responsible for most of that negative press. They've been pushing out those myths about what's wrong with EVs. But now they know if they want to sell a car in, most of Europe now by sort of between 2030 and 2035, they have to be selling electric cars. So they can't keep saying they're rubbish because they've got to sell them. And I think,
less than Toyota, of course. But
of course. But I just think that's helped move the narrative along, is that a lot of those companies don't have that mindset anymore of, if we keep saying it's rubbish, people won't buy them and we won't have to make them. Because even if they were rubbish, they would still have to make them because it's the only thing they're going to be allowed to sell.
As we all know, they definitely aren't rubbish.
Exactly. Yeah, sorry, let me make that provider there. That was a hypothetical statement.
No, it is interesting how one automaker in particular has been dragging their heels the most, even in 2021. I'm quite surprised by that. But one thing I mentioned today was the lead times, and I'm still quite surprised that the lead times are still quite long. Even though now we're selling 19,000 or like above 10,000 a month, that's I think 2018 we sold 15,000 in the whole year. And in June this year we sold more than we sold 19,000. But still, I feel like there's a significant demand, such that there is quite a bit of a lead time. But there's also, the pandemic and the global chip shortage.
Chip shortage, I think, is causing most of that. I mean, I've just been looking at some inside figures I've got on one of the other manufacturers, and their diesel remaining diesel thing they've got on their thing is now on a 7-month lead time. So I don't think it's all.
Okay, wow, yeah.
So I think that's. It's primarily the chip shortages. I mean, we were already seeing people like Audi, BMW cutting back on their digital dashboards, taking tech out of cars so they can carry on selling them at the same price they were selling them before, mind you, with the tech in. But I guess in some ways that probably appeals to their market to some extent, but the old school. It's very interesting, and I think we are going to see more delays in that respect. And I'm already hearing things like the Kia EV6 may be delayed beyond the end of the year on some of the models and things because of the chip shortage. So it's a shame.
I mean, EVs have suffered a little bit from almost a triple whammy. When they first started really catching on, once the Ampage came out, the e-tron came out, VW started producing their cars, the Mach-E came, was on the verge of coming out, and suddenly there was a battery shortage.
Yeah.
The battery companies managed to step up their game so they could produce more. The pandemic happened, and then as we start to come out of that, the chip shortage hits. So they've had a bit of a triple whammy. So particularly encouraging sales figures when you factor all of that
Consider that. Yeah.
So as we're coming to the end of our time we've got with you, I just wanted to. So you've already given us a slight prediction there. What you think it's going to be? So when do you think EVs will outsell normal cars?
Oh, pressure's on.
So we're saying new sales. So when the point where their sales will that's it.
I probably ought to rephrase that. When do you think EVs will become the normal cars? Will become the
See, that's a bit different, because like then
Yeah.
we got to replace the cars that are currently on the road, which I think will take a bit longer.
Yeah.
But for new sales, I would say before 2025, definitely.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So I would say we'll get 51% market share, something like that, by then. I think that's it is very optimistic.
I think you're probably right.
But I do feel like it's been a sustained growth of about 1.5 times every year on average as well, and I think that's only going to kind of increase once more people, just because of the knock-on effect of you see more people driving them, you ask them about it, and then I think the biggest challenge will be battery production, as kind of has been mentioned. There are stuff like the benefit in kind, the kind of tax. I think that's really helped people choose electric. As an anecdote, my friend was looking at a salary sacrifice scheme, and he was looking at an Audi A3. I think it was a hybrid, and then I asked him to look at some electric cars, and because of the benefit in kind, like tax difference, he could, and this particular leasing company were also doing a deal. He could get an Audi e-tron for slightly cheaper than an A3, which is just insane.
Yeah.
So I would say before 2025, we'll get a point where we've sold 51% that's like fully electric. So in terms of when kind of will there be majority of EV sales, EV cars on the road? If I understand right, so the kind of general turnover is about 15 years, like lifespan of a car. Maybe quicker than that. Maybe people will ditch their petrol car sooner. So maybe 2035, we'll see 80% of cars being electric. But I'm just a man spouting some numbers,
You spout very good numbers. That's what I was to say. Well, Matt, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been a
thank you
huge
for having
pleasure.
me on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for all the hard work you do with the tracking of the chargers.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And keep it up. We want to see these stats all the time.
Will do. Yeah, will do. Definitely.
Yeah, don't stop once they start in Scotland.
No, definitely not. All right. Thank you. Have a great week.
Great.
You
Thanks.
too.
Take care, man.
Okay.
Bye.
So, God, that was really interesting, wasn't it? That's amazing the amount of stuff he's been doing, and especially such a young man to do all that stuff. It's just incredible.
I know. I mean, he's taken on quite a massive workload there, really. I mean, that just tracking the grid search stuff alone is impressive. But when you learn about all the other stuff he's been doing,
it's really, really good, and so useful as well. And,
yeah.
I know this has been slightly off our normal iPace features, but I think it's been worth doing.
Well, it is off the iPace subject directly, but when you look at how much feedback, I mean, comment sections of so many of my videos, and the iPace forums as well, are full of comments about the electric highway. So it's hugely relevant to our viewership. Certainly.
Absolutely. And when I look at when I was setting up my beginner's guide to the iPace video the one thing I was asked to feature more and more was charging, because people were so
Yeah.
confused by it. And I do think, I mean, the whole good stuff thing just takes that confusion away. I'm so looking forward to auto charge. I can't
Yeah.
stay out when that comes out, which
I
isn't
mean,
going to be far away apparently. I think the app's due fairly shortly. So
I think I just read today that it's been. No, I can't. No, sorry, I'm thinking of something else. My apologies.
no,
But
I don't
I know
think
it's coming out
actually.
soon. Yeah.
They haven't said when, but I mean, I would think it would tie up quite nicely with the end of the rollout when they've replaced all the stuff. And
That's my guess.
yeah, and then they
Yeah.
can switch the switch and get that in place.
I mean, I'm dying to try one. I'm still 200 miles away from my nearest one at the moment. But once they get a bit closer up this way, I'll be rushing out and making a journey just to use one.
Now, the other thing I wanted to briefly touch on before we finish them tonight, because it's obviously been a very significant week in Scotland.
Indeed. And guessing
Yes.
that what we're touching on here is the fact that the Charge Place Scotland network has finally made the switch. Charge Your Car is no more. So the back-end services now are no longer provided by Charge Your Car, and are now provided by Swarco /Evo. You know, the company Swarco, but most people will probably know them as Evolt.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is that they used to supply most of the chargers anyway.
Indeed.
So they know the technology and how it's supposed to work. And I have to say, I've had some interesting conversations with Bob over the years about the Ampage and the fact that it's not charging on a lot of the chargers.
Oh, likewise,
Absolute hats off to that team for turning it around so quickly. I mean, that I know how difficult doing something like that back end is when you're transferring from a third party. And do it in the time scale they've done it. I think that's unprecedented.
Yeah, I don't think it's gone completely flawlessly. I've had a few reports from people of issues, shall we say, with chargers outside of the window where they said they wouldn't be available. It's caused a few problems along the way, I think, but to be honest, that was going to happen. You know, there's no way you can do something on this scale, you know, on the flick of a switch, really. So there were always going to be teething problems, but I mean, you know, within a day they've made the switch, and as far as I can tell, you know, okay, it took more than the few hours it was supposed to take for all of them to come online, but as far as I can tell, within a day, everything is done and dusted. I mean, I've had many conversations with Bob in the past, and I know that one of his biggest frustrations with the issues that people had with the Charge Place Scotland network were that his hands were pretty much tied as to what he could do about it. Because while they were their chargers, they were there at the behest of the host site, who were part funded by the Charge Place Scotland backups. You know, it's not as simple, and people don't realise that, a lot of people anyway, that the Charge Place Scotland network isn't just a charging provider like GridServe or Instavolt or Osprey. You know, the hosts are actually responsible for the charges. So the pub or the car park or the council, you know, or whatever, is actually responsible for the charges individually, and then Swarco or Evo provide the charger, but anything they wanted to do to the charger had to be paid for by the host, and some of that could be claimed back, I believe, from the Charge Place Scotland network. But it was a very complicated system, whereas now they're going to be running it, maintaining it, installing it. You know, it will make for a much easier service, I think.
Yeah, that's really good, I think. And so when I'm eventually allowed to visit you up in Scotland, how would I actually go about being able to sign up and use this new system?
Well, I mean, there's two methods at the moment. We're still waiting on some confirmation of it, but at the moment there are two basic methods. You can either just sign up to the app, which has been delayed slightly. I believe it's coming out on the 2nd of August now. And at that point, you'll be able to just sign up with the app, get an account on the app, and start your charger from there pretty much straight away. But the issue in Scotland is that many of the chargers are in places with very poor or non 4G coverage. So you can't get a data signal to use the app. So there you're using an RFID card. Now, anybody that's got the Charge Place Scotland one can continue to use it. It will switch over to the new system. Previously, you could use the Charge Your Car card, not so easy to say, but that's no longer available now. So if you've used your CYC card in the past to start a charge in Scotland, you won't be able to do that anymore. Now, in addition, there is a Swarco card available, but at the moment it's not tied into the Charge Place Scotland network. They are working on that, but at the moment, the only card that will work is the Charge Place Scotland one. Now, I believe under the Swarco system, you'll be able to get that RFID card sent out to you anywhere. But previously, you had to have a Scottish address to have a Charge Place Scotland card. But now I believe you can have them sent out to anywhere in the UK, but that would need confirmation. But that was the discussion at one point, certainly. And of course, gradually they are now talking about introducing contactless payment as well, which wasn't available before because most of the charges were free.
Yeah.
But now they're moving on to a charging.
Which is actually another point I was going to make, because there was that the Scottish government were talking this week about abolishing free charging. Was that something I saw?
You did. I mean, to be honest, in a lot of places it's gone anyway. There aren't that many left. The Highlands introduced it earlier this year. Edinburgh and Lothian introduced it, I think it was the back end of last year. Dumfries has been charging for quite a long time. Dundee's been charging for quite a long time. Ayrshire, where I live, is still free, but it's only a matter of time. So, there are places where it is still free, but it has gradually been done away with in most places. And now they've said, basically, it's pretty much unsustainable everywhere for the mid-term future, which I think everybody knew. I mean, you can't keep giving people free 50 kilowatt. Well, in some places they've got 150 kilowatt chargers for free. It's not viable.
I thought it was interesting. One of the stated reasons for it was to provide more competition. It goes back to our CMA conversation.
In all honesty, there's two big downsides to free charging. Which, I mean, it sounds counterintuitive. You think, well, free charging's got to be brilliant, hasn't it? But what it discourages is other companies from coming in. I mean, if you can plug into a Charge Place Scotland charger for nothing, who's going to pay 40p a kilowatt hour for an Instavolt charge, 36p for an Osprey charge? You're discouraging private companies in a way from coming and installing their chargers, because it's going to be harder for them to make money out of it. But the other thing, and in some ways the biggest thing, is charger etiquette. If you're not paying for it, so many people just plug in their car and
walk away.
And walk away.
Yeah.
And you see it all the time. And I hate to be a picker of, picking on hybrid owners, but that's, they're prime culprit. You
and of course,
see it so much.
And you haven't got that. I mean, you have got some great hubs, but a lot of from your journeys, I've seen a lot of the chargers are singles or twos, and that if you've got someone hogging one of those, you're stuck. And I think that's the other thing with the lack of finance going into the chargers. Maintenance becomes something you don't care quite so much about if you're not earning a lot of money for them.
Well, exactly. I mean, I suspect it saves people money if the charger's not working.
Yeah. So, it's a strange incentive, really, isn't it? So I can certainly see the argument for non-free chargers, and I suspect once you do that, you'll start seeing some inroads by some of these other charging companies into Scotland, which would be interesting. Interesting again, timing wise, with the Swarco Evolt takeover coming in, and then that suddenly comes along. I wonder if they were in on that as well. But
I mean, something we'll never know. It is a possibility, but I think the writing's been on the wall for a long time in relation to free charging. As I say, many councils did away with it sort of middle of last year onwards.
My only thing with Evolt, totally, I think, is that they seem to have this very strong approach that they're right and everybody else is wrong about the charging cable length and placement. I know the same thing's happening in the UK world,
Yeah.
UK wide, with the MFG rollout. MFG are using 8-volt chargers. You probably saw my experience. I wrote about there. I've actually got some video of that somewhere. But basically, the cables are basically too short, and MFG have said this, but that's what 8-volt are supplying them. And part of this is because there is no standard for cable length. Unlike the CHAdeMO, there is actually a space constraint. It's not particularly long, mind you, having said that, and people can save money by having shorter cables. That's the bottom line. And I do feel that in a lot of cases, the 8-volt chargers are going for the minimum they could possibly have in terms of cable length.
And I mean, just to draw on that picture behind you there, one of the issues you can see at rugby, they've got the sleeping policemen, or whatever you want to call them, the bump stoppers, which stop you getting too close. Most of Charge Play Scotland, if you've watched my charging videos around the Charge Play Scotland network, most of them are big metal bollards in front of the charger to protect chargers from bad parkers. But the downside to that is you're having to bump right up to those bollards just to get close enough to plug those cables in. And if you've got limited mobility, you're then trying to squeeze between car, the bollard, and the charger, and then manage a big unwieldy cable that's at full stretch to get it plugged in.
And I'll put Swarco's argument in here is the car manufacturers should have followed what was commonly available at the time in terms of what chargers were out there, and actually built their cars to fit with them, because the chargers predated the cars. So I can kind of get that the chargers were already out there before them, but I think now there are so many cars out there with charge ports not quite in the places to those. It's like saying, well, we're going to stick with CHAdeMO even though CCS has come along. Never change, which is not going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
I did find it interesting that in America they're actually going to start phasing CHAdeMO out on the chargers.
I saw that. Yeah.
I don't know. GridServe have taken completely the opposite view on that. That they will maintain CHAdeMO, and I thought it was interesting that their response to the CMA mentioned accessibility and actually talked about charging types rather than actual accessibility as I think about it. But
exactly. I was surprised because that wasn't my first thought when we were talking about accessibility.
But they basically said they'll make them accessible to any car that wants to come and charge. Which they're not at the moment, of course. There's a lot of Zoe drivers up in arms still that they haven't got anywhere to charge on their long journeys. But yeah, I mean, we could have all argued that with the CCS last for a long time.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
some always loses out on these things, but they are keen to get this sorted out. So
I mean, the good thing, I believe I'm right in saying, with those electric highway chargers, the new ones, is that they can be quite easily switched over between CCS and CHAdeMO on both connectors. So it's very easy. For example, let's say 50% of your customers are CHAdeMO now. I know they're not. I know it's 25, but just hypothetically, if it's 50% now, you would have every charger with one CHAdeMO and one CCS. But then a few years' time, if it drifted towards 75%, it's quite easy for them to swap. My understanding is to swap that over so that they could have 75% CCS connectors and 25% CHAdeMO. So they've actually got themselves into a position where the chargers can quite easily be modified to keep up with whatever the demand curve is at the time, other than the Zoe aspect.
And I know they've got answers for the Zoe, but that's actually reliant on a lot of things that the service is to actually put extra things in. That's not actually happening perhaps as quick as people would like. But it's a difficult one because
it is.
You can't provide for everybody to some extent. I mean, you look at most of the chargers out there no longer provide for AC Zoes. It's
You know, I mean, at least they are providing the CHAdeMO, and they seem to be seriously following the data as to how many connectors to provide per site. But you know, it's a difficult one. I can see why as a Zoe owner, you would be absolutely infuriated. I mean, I know how frustrating, shall we say, it is as an Ampage driver, the number of electric highway sites in Scotland that don't have CCS.
Yeah.
You know, and we've been putting up with that situation, well, forever. So I do get how frustrating it is. But then you have to, you just have to balance it up with how far do you go to accommodate absolutely everybody?
Mm-hmm.
You know, do you then have to include extra connectors for, the Volkswagen Golf Electric from 1984? Or do you know what I mean? I mean, not that there's always in that category, but I just feel it's easy to say when I haven't got a Zoe. I would be probably spitting feathers if I had a Zoe. So I do understand it, but unfortunately, the technology seems to be moving in that direction, and I feel to a certain extent the hands were a bit tied on it in respect to the chargers that they were installing.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think obviously you buy something like a Zoe on the basis that the electric highway is there and you can actually charge at all these places, and then suddenly it's not able to. I totally get that.
Yeah,
but it's
I do
difficult
as well. But I mean, I think even I'm right in saying I may have got this wrong, but even the Zoe now is coming with CCS, is it?
Oh yeah. You can get CCS Zoes now. So
so the general move is in that direction. Even I mean, it'd be interesting to see when Nissan completely drops the Chatamo, but I think they're doing it for the Aria. I think is going to be CCS, isn't it? So you have to say that everybody is easing towards CCS, but you do still have to provide. You can't expect somebody with a 3-year-old car to be locked out from public charging networks. But I know Electric Highway or GridServe have been looking at installing AC posts in the interim to accommodate the Zoe drivers. I don't know how that rollout is going. I know they've had some issues with, as you said, there's been issues with actual electricity provision and cabling and such. But I know that's their plan, is to install a lot of posts to accommodate Zoe. So hopefully
it is, but the I think there's the challenge has been the both physical, just actually getting a space to plug these things in, and also getting the power to them. I mean, GridServe have solutions for that. They can put batteries in and probably hook them, chain them off the other chargers potentially, and things like that. I mean, those chargers do have the capability of having AC attached to them as well, but obviously, I don't know if they've got the boards in there for that. But
I've never actually. I didn't realise that they had an AC option on those ones.
Yeah, well, it depends which ones they are, because there's quite a lot of different cabs being used in this rollout. So some of them have, some of them haven't. So it's interesting to see.
So, I mean, it is a shame that we're here rejoicing the new electric highway, where probably most Zoe owners are kind of missing the old one.
And also I have to say that I'm hearing a lot of Leaf owners saying they're having problems charging on the new chargers. So
right, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, so or getting very low charge rates, which seems to be a common thing.
It's not ideal.
It's not ideal, but that may be fixed with software. I mean, I know there's a big software update coming very shortly, which will allow the dual charging, which is going to eventually double all the charge at everything.
Exactly,
so actually, in a lot of the locations, it'd be really difficult to park to get four cars on those chargers, but at least you'd have the option potentially.
Yeah, I know. It's in fact, I think looking at the chargers behind you are a good example of that, aren't they?
Well, that's I think it's rugby. That's rugby, isn't it? That one. I can't remember which one I picked up. I've got picture.
No, that's rugby. I'm pretty sure that's rugby.
Yeah, Peter President. Well, it must be because they're tritiums, so it would be, which obviously different type of charger. But the ABB ones at Peterborough, they're quite close together, and you haven't got an awful lot of room to put 4 cars there. Although potentially you could get 4. Maybe they'll be able to get extra parking spaces, because if they were able to take the parking spaces either side of where the chargers are, they would definitely be able to get that. And I know, and I do see that suddenly the services are now interested in their charging infrastructure and are starting to use it as part of their advertising.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes, the more people have the cars, the more of a draw it becomes. The more of a draw it becomes, the more keen they'll be to.
Yeah, it was really interesting that when that Coast Hill charges, the MFG one, when I complained about the charging, I immediately got a reply back from MFG on it. Not for
Yeah.
the charging road, but for me, MFG saying they'd taken it on board and they were keen to encourage EV drivers. So, I mean, the only problem at the moment is that they tend to put chargers in on those services, their sort of mini services, in the places where people used to park.
I
So,
know, yeah.
and there's nowhere for people to park anymore. So they're quite, I think, quite justified in parking in the chargers when they're not in use, because it seems like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really anti-icing, but I think that's I can kind of see the justification for that, because if you're a van driver coming to get your lunch and there's nowhere left for you to park, where do you do? Well, you might, in the future, you might park by the pumps, because they probably won't be in use. But
Yeah. Good point. Yes.
but, so this has been great as ever.
As always.
I enjoyed this one. It's good. We've got the ideas for more shows, and we'll try and get those lined up as soon as we can. But for now, I think it's time to sign off to our loyal viewers. Have we got any of those? I think we have.
We must have one or two. Well, I always watch videos. I don't
Yeah, and I
know.
always watch yours, so that's what it is.
There you go. We've each got at least one loyal viewer.
Indeed. Right, everyone, take care, and we'll see you on the next show.
Take care. Thanks.